I walked into the office after my 4-day regional meeting in Denver, feeling lighter and more accomplished than I had in several months. The quarterly engineering metrics were outstanding. Our critical project deadlines had all been met ahead of schedule, and I had even managed to negotiate an additional 25% budget increase for team technical training. But the moment I stepped off the elevator on the 10th floor, a strange sensation washed over me. The usual vibrant energy of a Monday morning was completely absent from our department floor. The East Wing corridor, where my team of 7 brilliant software engineers had worked for several years, was eerily quiet and empty. "Clara Jenkins," I called out, looking for our veteran lead developer who was always the first to arrive at her desk. There was no reply. Our workspace, a bright and airy area that we had earned after successfully delivering 3 consecutive breakthrough software architectures, was completely stripped. The desks were cleared, the monitors were gone, and even the small potted plants we had nurtured on the windowsills had vanished. Only the rectangular dust outlines on the carpet remained where our high-performance server towers and workstations had been. As I stood there trying to comprehend the scene, I spotted Owen Brooks from the accounting department walking past with a stack of invoices. I stepped forward and asked him what had happened to my team. Owen stopped, his eyes charting around the hallway before his expression shifted to something resembling pity. He told me that I should check the basement, explaining that the movers had relocated my entire department on Friday afternoon. The basement was not even a proper office space. It was a storage area filled with obsolete server racks and electrical conduits. The elevator ride down felt like it lasted an eternity, with each passing floor dial increasing my sense of dread. When the heavy doors finally slid open in the basement, I had to navigate through dim corridors, past maintenance lockers and vibrating water pumps, before I found a heavy metal door with a hastily taped piece of paper. The paper had the words Engineering Team B written in black marker. I pushed the door open to find my team huddled together in a cramped room with exposed piping running across the ceiling. Their high-resolution monitors were balanced precariously on folding tables, and thick extension cords snaked across the damp concrete floor. A slow drip from an overhead pipe landed with a rhythmic sound into a plastic bucket placed right next to Clara's makeshift desk. I asked them what had happened, though their downcast faces and tense shoulders already told me the entire story. Clara looked up from her screen, her eyes burning with humiliation as she explained that while I was away, our new department head, Harlan Cole, had come down with a crew of movers. He had informed them that they needed to relocate immediately to make room for a new specialist, giving them only 30 minutes to pack up years of work. When I asked about this specialist, Chloe Bennett, our youngest developer who was fresh out of her engineering program, added that Harlan had claimed this new hire would completely revolutionize the productivity of the entire division. I left the basement and climbed back upstairs to our former workspace. The bright strategic area was now occupied by a single young man who was busy arranging framed certificates on the desk that used to be mine. Harlan Cole, who had only been with the company for 7 months, was hovering nearby, watching the young man with an expression of unbridled admiration. Harlan called out to me when he saw me standing in the doorway, eagerly introducing the young man as Preston Vance, their new productivity transformation specialist. Harlan claimed that Preston's methods had increased output by 150% at his previous companies, and that he required a proper, quiet space to implement his vision. He lowered his voice slightly to add that my team could manage downstairs until the next fiscal quarter's budget review. I stared at Preston, who did not even bother to pause his decorating to acknowledge me, and merely nodded my head silently before returning to the damp basement. My team was waiting for me, the distant vibration of the building's industrial ventilation system humming through the walls. The wireless network signal barely reached the basement, and the nearest restroom was a single toilet down the hall. The air in the room was thick with the smell of mildew and collective defeat. Silas Thorne, our senior hardware specialist, who had spent 38 years with this company, muttered that he had never expected to be treated like unwanted furniture after decades of loyal service. I looked at their dejected faces. These were people who had given their lives to the company, pulling countless all-nighters to rescue failing projects now shoved into a dark corner. And that was when I smiled, feeling a calm confidence settle over me. I told them to pack their bags. They stared at me, confused by my reaction. I held their gaze, my smile steady, and told them to trust me. I instructed them to quietly gather everything they might want to take with them, and to keep our plans strictly confidential. I had spent 18 years coordinating complex logistics in refugee camps during major humanitarian crises across 4 continents before joining this firm. I knew how to handle difficult situations, and I knew how to build a network of support when resources were scarce. I was the leader of this team, and I was not going to let them be discarded. Our transition was about to begin. For 3 weeks after our forced relocation to the basement, we worked under abysmal conditions. The temperature in the storage room fluctuated wildly, between freezing drafts and stifling heat. The flickering fluorescent bulbs gave everyone constant headaches, and we twice had to cover our sensitive electronics with plastic tarps during overhead pipe leaks. Yet, my team followed my quiet instructions without a single complaint. They archived their current projects, organized their local databases, and created comprehensive transition guides while continuing to complete their daily assigned tasks. I had spent 10 years building this specific engineering division, handpicking each member not just for their technical expertise, but for their resilience under pressure. My years in humanitarian logistics had taught me how to read people, and I knew that a crisis did not change who a person was. It merely revealed their true character. Every engineer on my team had a unique strength that the company had long taken for granted. Clara Jenkins, our lead developer, had been rejected by multiple other departments due to her direct and unfiltered communication style. But I recognized her rare genius with complex system architecture. She had survived 3 separate corporate reorganizations in the past, each time standing up for engineering quality when others stayed silent. Chloe Bennett, our youngest developer, had a natural talent for finding elegant solutions in messy code, yet she had been passed over by other managers in favor of candidates with flashier credentials. Silas Thorne, our hardware specialist who was approaching retirement after 38 years of service, possessed a deep, intuitive knowledge of our physical server arrays that no textbook could ever replicate. He spent 40 minutes every morning routing heavy-duty power lines away from the dampest concrete walls, determined to shield our critical development systems from sudden electrical surges. Jonas Finch was our quietest member, fluent in 5 programming languages, but struggling with social interactions. He had started writing software when he was only 12 years old, using an old discarded computer his father had rescued from a landfill. Maya Kelly had designed testing protocols that had quietly become the standard across the entire firm, while Kira Woods built security systems that were virtually impenetrable. Kira spent her spare time reading advanced cryptographic journals, building bespoke firewall layers that kept our company's server network safe from external threats. Finally, Nora Pierce served as our division communicator, translating our complex technical reports into plain English that any corporate executive could easily understand. She spent hours refining our logs to ensure that any outside auditor could immediately verify the value of our work. We were not a flashy team, but the senior leadership knew we were the ones who solved the problems that everyone else declared impossible. The trouble had begun when our previous department head retired, and Harlan Cole was brought in to lead us. Harlan possessed grand ambitions, but had zero understanding of the software we built. From his very first day, he had been searching for a dramatic development to impress the executive board, ignoring our steady history of success in favor of buzzword-filled presentations. His new favorite specialist, Preston Vance, had charmed him with slide decks and promises of revolutionary methods. What Harlan had failed to research was why someone with Preston's supposedly transformative skills had changed employers 4 times in a short 3-year span. Preston was a charlatan who specialized in taking credit for other people's labor while implementing superficial metrics that created the illusion of progress. One afternoon, Kira Woods called me over to her desk, her hands shaking slightly as she pointed to a system access log on her monitor. She had discovered that Preston had downloaded a proprietary network security module she had spent over a year developing. More than that, she had found a presentation on the company's shared drive where Preston had rebranded her code as his own invention, calling it the Advanced Security Optimizer. Kira was furious, pointing out that this was a clear violation of copyright law. I calmed her down and advised her that we would handle this professionally. I reminded her that under Title 17, Section 106 of the United States Code, federal copyright protection applied to her original source code from the moment it was written and compiled. Since she had officially registered the repository under our department's intellectual property assets, Preston's unauthorized copying and public display of her work constituted federal copyright infringement. I instructed her to secure the system logs, showing his unauthorized access, export the version histories, and save the metadata showing he had copied the files without making any functional modifications. Later, that afternoon, Jonas Finch whispered to me while we were packing up some old cables, asking why we were documenting our work so meticulously when the company obviously did not appreciate anything we did. I told him that everything we did should be performed with complete integrity, regardless of our physical workspace. I explained that maintaining high standards was about self-respect, not about pleasing Harlan Cole. The other team members overheard my explanation and exchanged quiet, knowing looks. They still did not know the details of my plan, but they trusted me enough to continue their work. We continued to build our documentation, creating a perfect record of our achievements, while Preston Vance enjoyed his spacious office on the 10th floor, completely unaware of the digital paper trail we were compiling beneath his feet. The basement was cold, but our resolve was solid. The tension in the basement began to lift slightly when came an unexpected request from Evelyn Sinclair, the chief executive officer of the company, asking me to present our team's history of project deliveries at the upcoming quarterly board meeting. Evelyn had been tracking our achievements through our department's weekly technical logs, and she wanted to hear from the actual authors of the system. My team's spirits rose immediately. They saw this as the long overdue recognition of their hard work. I spent the entire weekend reviewing our performance metrics, formatting the tables, and ensuring that our data was completely clear and indisputable. The morning of the presentation, I dressed in my sharpest suit and reviewed my presentation slides in the dim, flickering light of the basement. As I climbed the stairs to the executive suite, Harlan Cole intercepted me in the stairwell, physically blocking my path. The stairwell had cold concrete steps and yellow handrails that echoed our voices. He smirked and told me there was a change of plans, claiming that the board wanted to hear about future innovations rather than past performance metrics. He announced that Preston Vance would present instead. When I pointed out that Evelyn Sinclair had personally requested my presence, Harlan claimed that he had spoken with her that morning and that she had agreed his approach made more sense. He told me I could return to my basement workspace, his eyes showing no genuine warmth. My team deflated completely when I returned with the news. Chloe Bennett, our youngest member, stared at her half-written resignation letter visible on her monitor screen, asking if we were simply giving up. I replied in a steady voice that we were not giving up, instructing them to keep packing their personal items quietly. Later that afternoon, the company Grapevine reported that Preston's board presentation had been a spectacular disaster. The board chair, a serious executive with decades of experience, had leaned forward and asked Preston to explain the database, scaling bottlenecks, and system latency issues in detail. Preston was completely unable to answer, exposing his shallow understanding of our core technology stack. He had tried to hide his lack of knowledge behind corporate buzzwords like workflow, synergy, and productivity paradigm, which only served to irritate the board members who demanded concrete technical data. Harlan tried to intervene to rescue his star hire, explaining that the details were confidential, but his explanation was equally empty, and he looked increasingly desperate. The other board members began whispering among themselves and shaking their heads in disapproval. Harlan attempted immediate damage control by visiting our basement workspace, suddenly acting friendly and polite. He stepped into the damp room, trying to keep his leather shoes dry on the concrete floor while avoiding the water dripping from the ceiling. He announced that he was considering moving us back upstairs to the East Wing. While the East Wing was better than our current basement exile, it was still a clear demotion from our original strategic workspace. The message was clear. Harlan still valued his golden hire more than my entire team. I smiled and thanked him for recognizing our value, which surprised my confused team members who had expected me to reject the offer outright. 2 days later, I invited an old professional colleague, Lydia Foster, to tour our facility. Lydia was a senior executive at Cobalt Solutions, a major competitor in the software space. As we walked through the different floors, I deliberately timed our arrival at the executive wing for when I knew Harlan would be showing Preston Vance around to some prospective clients. Lydia looked around the mahogany hallways with an expression of subtle amusement, comparing the expensive artwork on the walls to our dark basement. Harlan called out to me when he saw us, introducing the clients to Preston, who immediately launched into his rehearsed speech about his productivity system. He boasted that his methods had boosted development efficiency by 300% at his previous company, Northwest Technologies, within a single fiscal quarter. Lydia listened patiently until he finished, then stepped forward with a cool and measured look. She informed Preston that she sat on the board of directors at Northwest Technologies and that they had never recorded any such improvements. In fact, she added, their audits noted significant project delays and quality issues during his tenure there. The conference room went completely silent. Preston's confident expression vanished, and Harlan's face flushed a deep red as he tried to claim there was some misunderstanding. I interjected calmly, explaining that there was no misunderstanding, and announced that Lydia was here because I had officially accepted her job offer the day before. I told Harlan that I was bringing my entire engineering team to establish a new development division at Cobalt Solutions, starting the following Monday. Harlan sputtered in anger, claiming that taking the team was poaching and highly unethical. I finished his sentence for him, pointing out that our employment contracts contained no non-compete clauses. In addition, I reminded him that under California Business and Professions Code Section 16,600, non-compete restrictions are completely void and unenforceable for employees in this state. I told him our departure was completely lawful. Lydia Foster stepped forward, adding that the board of directors at Cobalt Solutions had formally approved the creation of our new engineering division yesterday afternoon. After reviewing our team's historic performance metrics against industry standards, the prospective clients from the external firm shifted uncomfortably, sensing the sudden shift in power, and began gathering their briefcases, making polite excuses to leave the tense room. Once the clients had filed out, leaving only Harlan, Preston, and me, Harlan turned on me, his voice cracking with panic. He offered to match whatever salary package Lydia had promised, pleading with me to stay. I looked at him with a calm, steady smile, the very one I had worn since finding my team in the basement. I told him it was too late. I walked out of the executive suite, leaving him standing there in silence with his golden hire. What I did not tell Harlan was that my plan had been set in motion long before the basement incident, and that what he had just witnessed was merely the beginning of the transition. When I returned to our basement workspace, my team was waiting anxiously, their expressions ranging from tentative hope to sheer terror. I closed the door behind me and checked the corners of the room for any potential listening devices, a cautious habit I had developed during my refugee logistics days. I announced that the deal was finalized, confirming that Lydia had offered all of us positions at Cobalt Solutions with nearly double our current compensation, providing a 90% salary increase, proper equipment, and a spacious office with real windows. The silence that followed was deafening until Chloe Bennett let out a loud shout that echoed off the concrete walls. A dripping sound hit the plastic bucket behind Clara's desk. Chloe had placed a sponge at the base of the bucket to silence the noise, as the constant plinking was driving Jonas Finch crazy. Silas Thorne sat back in his chair, his weathered face showing a mix of disbelief and relief. He admitted he had trusted I would not leave them in that dark room forever. Nora Pierce squeezed my hand, asking how I had managed to secure such an arrangement so quickly. I explained that it was not quick, revealing that I had been laying the groundwork for several months. Their faces registered confusion, and Kira Woods pointed out that the basement relocation had only occurred 3 weeks ago. I sat on the edge of a folding table, explaining that the basement was simply the final straw. I told them I had seen where the department was heading the day. Harlan arrived and started talking about fresh perspectives while ignoring our proven track record. I explained that I had been documenting everything: our team's contributions, Harlan's dismissals, and project successes he had attempted to claim as his own. I had reached out to old professional contacts, including Lydia, just to reconnect. Dax Finch, always the most observant despite his social awkwardness, studied my face and suggested that there was more to my plan than just finding us new jobs. I did not deny it, but advised the team to focus on the immediate transition. I told them we had exactly 1 week to wrap up our current projects professionally, with no loose ends and no unfinished work. I emphasized that we must leave with our professional reputations completely intact. Clara asked if Harlan knew we were all leaving, and I confirmed that he did, and that he was panicking. I explained that the board was already questioning the resources allocated to Preston, and losing an entire specialized team would raise serious concerns about Harlan's leadership. For the next 3 days, we operated with mechanical precision. Every single line of code was thoroughly commented, every software process was documented, and every system module was mapped out. We worked longer hours than required, our impending freedom fueling our productivity. On the 4th day of our final week, Harlan appeared in the basement looking completely haggard. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his shirt was wrinkly. He asked if we could speak privately. I looked at my team, who pretended to be working while straining to hear, and told him that anything he had to say could be said in front of everyone. Silas Thorne was packing his heavy steel toolbox in the corner, clicking the latches shut loudly. Harlan shifted from foot to foot, stating that he had spoken with the executive board and was authorized to offer us a 20% raise, effective immediately, along with expediting the renovation of the East Wing. I noticed he carefully avoided mentioning Preston's future. I told him we had already signed our contracts with Cobalt Solutions, and when he suggested breaking them, I informed him that Lydia's legal team had ensured there were no exit penalties. Harlan's professional veneer cracked completely, and he pleaded that this would destroy his career. I felt almost sorry for him, but I reminded him that the basement was not a mistake. It was a revelation that showed us exactly how much he valued our work. He left in silence. That evening, my phone rang, and the caller identification showed it was Evelyn Sinclair, the chief executive officer. She requested a private meeting the following morning. Chloe asked the question I had been anticipating. The next morning, I entered Evelyn Sinclair's corner office on the top floor of the building. The glass walls offered a wide view of the city, and I could see the tall office buildings of our competitors across the street, their windows reflecting the gray morning clouds. I watched the rain begin to fall against the glass, small droplets tracing clean lines down the clean pane. The atmosphere inside was thick with corporate politics. Evelyn gestured to the chair across from her, stating she had reviewed our team's contributions over the past 5 years and found our deliverables outstanding. She sat behind her desk, sipping coffee from a white porcelain cup, watching the steam rise slowly as she spoke. She acknowledged that my team was the true backbone of our division. She asked why we were all leaving, noting that a basement relocation seemed like an insufficient explanation. I maintained eye contact and explained that the basement was the physical manifestation of how Harlan, and by extension the company, viewed our worth. To my surprise, Evelyn admitted she had been outvoted by the board regarding Preston's hiring, but losing our team was too high a price. She slid a folder across her desk, containing a formal offer to create a new engineering department reporting directly to her, bypassing Harlan entirely, with resources and compensation that exceeded Lydia's offer. For the first time, my resolve wavered. This was everything we had deserved from the beginning. I told her I needed to discuss this with my team. I returned to the basement and laid out the terms. An intense discussion followed. Silas Thorne stood up, his voice heavy with years of experience, and argued that the company had only shown interest in us when we decided to walk out the door. He said that a management that puts its engineers in a wet basement with dripping pipes does not deserve their loyalty, and that we would be fools to trust them again. Clara Jenkins agreed with Silas, but Nora Pierce suggested that having the chief executive officer's direct backing would give us the authority to restructure the division on our own terms, without Harlan's interference. Chloe was worried about our commitment to Lydia. Jonas Finch finally spoke, saying this decision was about what we could live with personally. We weighed the options for over an hour. I took a deep breath and proposed a strategic split. I suggested that Clara, Silas, Jonas, and Nora accept Evelyn's offer to run the internal division. Meanwhile, Chloe, Maya, Kira, and I would join Cobalt Solutions under Lydia. We would maintain close professional connections and collaborate on key projects. This split approach would create an external network, ensuring that neither company could ever take us for granted again. The team was amazed by the strategy, and after discussing the coordination, they enthusiastically agreed. I then contacted both Evelyn and Lydia, who agreed to this collaborative arrangement. However, the final phase of my plan needed to happen immediately. The next morning at 9 o'clock, Evelyn's assistant escorted our team into the boardroom. Harlan sat down the table, looking pale, with Preston beside him. Harlan stared in shock as we entered. Evelyn announced that our team was here to provide context on the department's performance. As Harlan stood to present his restructuring slides, claiming his productivity method would increase output by 150%, Evelyn interrupted and asked him to explain the basement relocation. Harlan tried to claim it was an interim solution, but Evelyn noted the renovations only began after we resigned. I then stood and asked my team to distribute a comprehensive report to the board members. The report detailed our team's productivity and revealed a serious conflict of interest. We showed that Harlan had signed an unauthorized software vendor agreement with Vance Consulting Group, a shell company owned entirely by Preston, for $75,000 of corporate funds. This was a clear breach of fiduciary duty of loyalty and care, representing corporate waste and self-dealing. Under corporate law, this fraudulent conflict of interest rendered the agreement void from the beginning. In addition, we presented court records showing Preston's history of wrongful termination lawsuits and class action settlements at his previous employers. The board chair, reviewing the documents we distributed, looked at Harlan Cole with severe disappointment. He pointed out that $75,000 had been transferred to a shell company for software that did not even exist, which was a clear breach of Harlan's duty of loyalty, exposing him to immediate termination and legal action. Preston Vance sat in silence, his head lowered as the board members debated their next steps. The board members were appalled, and Harlan and Preston were immediately terminated from the firm. The board chair turned to me, asking why I had brought this to light if we were leaving. I explained that we cared about the company's integrity, and then presented our split-team collaboration proposal. The board approved it unanimously. 8 months later, our collaborative model was featured in major industry publications. The partnership had increased innovation, and our team members occupied bright windowed offices. We had turned a toxic exile into a lasting system of mutual respect.